I now call the honourable member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The former Finance Minister, Lindsay Tanner, has been in the news lately, and one of the things that he says about politics, which I think a lot of people would agree with, is that everybody exaggerates everything. But let me tell you one thing, Mr Deputy Speaker. With this government, when we say that things are actually this bad, I can genuinely say to the Australian people that they are. Because it's hard to remember that this government is only 3.5 years old. It seems so tired, it seems so incompetent, it seems so incapable of moving Australia in any coherent direction. In fact, it seems so incapable of outlining any direction that it would like to see Australia go in, that it looks as old and as tired and as ready to be assassinated as the New South Wales government that fell in March. For all the failings of this government, nowhere are their failings more apparent than on the issue of border protection. Because the same strands of incompetence that are so obvious across the whole range of policies for this Labor government are magnified when we look at the failure to protect Australia's borders. First, one of the characteristics of this government, something that the Leader of the Opposition outlined again in question time, is that they have the reverse Midas touch. Everything they touch has turned sour. Any policy area that they turn their attention to becomes an absolute disaster. No matter how good the intentions, such as, well, it's a good idea to insulate houses, it's a good idea to have faster broadband, no matter how good the kernel of the idea, no matter how good their intentions, everything they do turns out to be a complete and utter disaster. So yes, it's a good idea to insulate homes, but the way they do it, we end up with those houses being burnt down, people killed. Faster broadband's a good idea. We all believe in that. Yet the way they tackle it is to waste literally tens of billions of dollars on an outdated scheme that is going to be an absolute millstone around the necks of all Australians for a generation to come. We'll probably see the same tonight with set-top boxes. But border protection is probably the worst of these failures, because when the Labor Party came to office, they inherited a solution to this problem. The previous government had faced challenges in this area and they'd chosen to resolve and they'd solved it. So all Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd and the Labor Party needed to do, all they needed to do when they came to office was nothing. If they just left well enough alone, we wouldn't be inundated with almost the 11,500 illegal arrivals that we've had since the Labor Party weakened the robust system of border protection that they inherited when they came to office. The second characteristic of this government is that it is wildly inconsistent in a way that I think highlights to the Australian people that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. They don't appear in any way, shape or form to be competent stewards of the national interest, but they just appear to be out of control victims of circumstance with no ability to shape events and no ability to control the direction of the country. So they wind back the tough but fair provisions that the previous government has made for welfare for work, yet tonight apparently they're going to announce a crackdown on welfare recipients. They promised no carbon tax, but within months of being re-elected, they explicitly repudiate that promise, and now they're going to bring in a carbon tax. And yet again on border protection, it exposes their complete inability to shape events, their lack of conviction and their blatant hypocrisy. This government and the members of it spent years criticising the previous government for the Pacific solution, the solution that was part of the suite of measures that the Howard government took that actually ended the people smuggling business and took control of this problem on behalf of the Australian people. The current Prime Minister was actually somebody who derided the Pacific solution for years as the opposition shadow spokesman for immigration. In 2003, in this place, she said the so-called Pacific solution is nothing more than the world's most expensive detour sign. It does not stop you getting to Australia, it just puts you through a detour on the way, while most Australian taxpayers pay for it and pay for it. Indeed, of stunts like this is referring to the Pacific solution, it is time the Howard government faced up to engaging in a long-term solution in relation to refugees and asylum seekers. A long-term solution, the next 8 votes. The so-called Pacific solution is not a long-term solution. Can anyone in this place really imagine that Australia will be processing asylum seeker claims on Nauru in 10 to 20 years? Well, mate, we ask, can anyone really imagine that Australia is going to take 10 to 20 years to get these 800 people who are now going to be transferred to Malaysia? Earlier on in a grievance debate, the Prime Minister, the then Opposition Immigration Minister, said again of third country processing. The so-called Pacific solution, stripped of the other policies of the government, has scrambled around and tried to put in place since Tampa, is really no more than the processing of people offshore in third countries. It is a policy that Labor does not support because it achieves nothing and costs so much in so many ways. In money, in goodwill in our region and in division in our community. Well, this is the hypocrisy that this government has now become famous for. And that is why the Australian people understand that they stand for nothing and they're enormous hypocrites and they'll do whatever they deem to be in their political interests. The Prime Minister said today about children in detention, another area where they are rank hypocrites, Mr Deputy Speaker, because when they came to office in 2007, not one child was in detention in Australia, and there's now over 800 children in detention, specifically because of the failed policies of the Labor Party. The third characteristic of this government, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that they never tell the truth. They have a habit of making grand announcements, and you need to unwind and have a look at the detail before you get an opportunity to see what's really going on. We see it in the mining tax, a big announcement followed by the unravelling once we see how silly the details of that tax were. Again, this characteristic is evident in border protection. The Prime Minister announced to great fanfare during the election campaign one of the areas that she was going to fix when she became Prime Minister, border protection, and the way she was going to do that was she was going to create a regional processing centre in East Timor. Sadly, and I think rather astonishingly, nobody thought to ask the East Timorese. Now, we know that foreign affairs is not the Prime Minister's forte because she's admitted that,
no, it's not.
But really I think that would fall into the category of common sense. That if you're going to push for an East Timorese processing centre, you'd pick up the phone and you'd talk to your counterpart, the head of government of East Timor, something that never happened. And what's happened, of course, is as this policy has completely and utterly unravelled, we've had the Prime Minister and her ministers and other members of the Labor Party run around in what became a Python-esque farce, silliness, running around saying, no, this idea is not dead, it's only sleeping, they would cry. But mercifully, Mr Deputy Speaker, the East Timorese Regional Processing Centre has been put to bed on Saturday, when the Prime Minister announced a new thought bubble, the Malaysian solution. And wouldn't you want to play poker with these guys? Wouldn't you want to sell them a car? In fact, I'd like to sell them a bridge. I would like to sell them a bridge. 800 asylum seekers the Malaysian government will take in exchange for the 4,000 that they're going to send here to Australia. And you understand that the minister would have started going up to Malaysia and saying, look, what about we have some swapsies? What about we go one for one, we'll give you one of ours and we'll take one of yours. And the Malaysians would have said, no. And he said, oh, well, 2 for 1? No. 3 for 1? No, I don't think so. 4 for 1? And you could just see the desperation would be leaching off the minister by now. No, not 4 for 1. And finally they came from 4 for 1. And wouldn't the Malaysian government be kicking themselves that they didn't ask for more? Because this government has become a regional embarrassment. And of course it's the dignity of Australia that suffers when we have a government that negotiates from such an enormous position of weakness. Mr Deputy Speaker, the fourth thing that characterises this government is a complete disregard for taxpayers' money. We see it on pinkbacks, we see it on school halls, and we see it in border protection. This time last year we had a $1 billion blowout on their failed border protection policies, although I suspect that effort's going to look amateurish compared to what the government announces tonight. We already know they're going to blow $300 million on the Malaysian deal. There've already been a $500 million blowout to manage our detention centres, let alone the damage that's been done on Christmas Island that would run into the tens of millions of dollars that we had a chance to look at over the last fortnight. This government has no resolve to deal with the issue of border protection, and the chaos it's created is completely a chaos of their own making. If they came to office and did nothing, Australia would not be in this position. They need to take responsibility for the chaos they've caused, and they need to adopt policies that we know will work and that the opposition is now proposing.
The honourable member's time has expired.